the separation of milk and meat. People know Jews buy this. They won't drink a glass of milk with a meat meal. They separate their dishes. Some even have two dishwashers.
Right. Even in Jerusalem, you go to a restaurant and they'll say on the front, is it a meat restaurant or a milk restaurant? And the two can't mix. So it says in the Torah very clearly, in 3 places, word for word, I'll read to you from Exodus 23. It says, Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. A kid, of course, is a young goat or a young sheep.
Yeah.
It says 3 times, word for word, do not boil a kid in its mother's milk.
Yeah.
So as a Karaite, I asked the question, an ancient Israelite shepherd or farmer hearing this, hearing the Torah read to him every 7th year, as is described in Deuteronomy 31, what would he understand from the commandment, do not boil a kid in its mother's milk? Presumably he'd understand, do not boil a kid in its mother's milk. And especially if it says the same thing 3 times.
This is the way Babylonians sacrificed, I understand, and Canaanites. It was very inhumane.
It was a Canaanite fertility ritual, is what's been discovered by archaeologists, that it was they would take the firstborn kid and they'd boil it in the milk of its mother, and that was a fertility ritual for the goddess Ishtar or Ashtoreth. The commandment, though, is very clear, do not boil a kid in its mother's milk. And the fact that it says it 3 times, that's because the people were hearing this. Remember, not everybody had a Bible in their house.
Yes.
To produce a Bible, to produce a copy of the Torah was an immense undertaking. You had to be very rich. You had to slaughter a whole flock of sheep for the hides, produce barrels and barrels of ink. You didn't go to a store and buy a pen. And you had to pay somebody to sit for at least a year to copy it. There's actually law in Deuteronomy 17 that the king has to write for himself a copy of the Torah.
Oh, yeah.
Why is that? It takes a king to have the resources to have a copy.
I understand.
So in Deuteronomy 31 it tells us that the way Israel learned the Torah is they heard it read aloud every 7th year.
Okay.
Now if something's being read aloud, repetition is very important. So where do the rabbis get eating meat and milk together from do not boil a kid in its mother's milk? Well, they say that if something is repeated word for word, in the same exact words 3 times, and it actually has 3 separate meanings. Because they don't ask the question, what would the ancient shepherd understand? They look at Scripture as a secret code, and only they have the secret method of how to decipher that code. Yeah. So if it says 3 times word for word, do not boil a kid in its mother's milk, it means 3 separate things. And there's actually an old rabbinic joke about this, that goes that Moses is up on Mount Sinai, and he's receiving the Torah, and God says to him, Moses, do not boil a kid in its mother's milk. And Moses says, what do you mean by that? Oh, you mean don't eat meat and milk together? Moses, do not boil a kid in its mother's milk. What do you mean by that? Oh, you mean have separate dishes for meat and milk, which of course Orthodox Jews do today. Moses, do not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Oh, you mean wait 6 hours after I eat meat until I'm allowed to eat milk. Again, something Orthodox do.
Yeah.
God finally says, whatever you want.
Yeah, he gives up. Yeah.
Now, this is a joke that the rabbis tell, but it illustrates a point here that when something is repeated word for word 3 times in Scripture, the rabbis interpret it as having 3 separate meanings, as if they're somehow divining what God really meant. Why not just take at face value what God meant? He was very clear about it. He said it 3 times. So I eat meat and milk together, absolutely no problem. I don't have separate dishes for meat and milk. There's just no reason not to. It's a very interesting thing that Maimonides talks about. He says that Maimonides was a great 12th century rabbinic theologian, and really modern Orthodox Judaism is the religion of Maimonides in many respects. He says that when the future prophets, when prophecy is reestablished and a prophet will come, and he tells the rabbis that they've interpreted the law wrong in even the most minor point, that prophet must be executed. Because a prophet has no right to contradict the words of the rabbis. The rabbis in rabbinic thought have absolute authority to interpret Scripture.
You don't even read about them in the Scriptures.
Right. I mean, that for me was one of the most amazing things, because I was raised with rabbinic Judaism, and when I actually sat down and started reading I'd read the Torah, but when I sat down and started reading the prophets and the writings, I genuinely, naively expected that I'd be reading about this rabbi and that rabbi, and they're not mentioned anywhere. No. There's no mention of an oral Torah. A basic doctrine of rabbinic Pharisaic Judaism is that there's an oral Torah revealed on Mount Sinai. It's not mentioned anywhere in the entire Hebrew Scripture.